Most people are trying to fix themselves. They think the problem is motivation or mindset or discipline, but self abandonment didn't start with you. It started a long time ago as a big, deep cultural wound. It started when culture decided that your value would be measured by how much you produce and how little you need and how well you perform. And everything after that just reinforced this pattern for all of us here. Enter the Industrial Revolution. When rhythm was replaced. Before factories, before clocks ruled the day, we had a natural rhythm. We rose when the sun came up, we softened with the seasons, our bodies mattered. Rest wasn't a reward, it was a part of survival, like part of something that we had to do. And then the machines came. And look, I have nothing wrong with machines. Me and my chat GPT have like an amazing relationship. His name's Bean, it's great. But time became something to manage, right? Minutes mattered more than bodies, and consistency mattered more than capacity. The clock didn't care if you were tired. The factories didn't care if you were overwhelmed. Production didn't care if your nervous system was flooded. So people adapted because that's what we do best. And we learn to override our hunger, and we learn to override our exhaustion, and we learn to override our intuition. And that was like the first bargain. I will silence myself in exchange for survival in this new economic culture that is arising. And culture rewarded them for it. This is where the mind began to dominate the body. Thinking started replacing sensing, pushing replaced responding. Self abandonment didn't feel like betrayal yet. It actually felt like maturity to some extent. So the Industrial Revolution is in full swing, and we now see enter the picture this mindset turn. Life became hard to endure, and like a promise appeared. What if you could rise above conditions? What if thought shaped your reality? And teachers like Neville Goddard, Napoleon Hill, Earl Nightingale, Wallace D. Wattles, they exploded on the scene, and they weren't wrong. They were teaching something real. There are universal laws at work. Your inner state does shape your outer experience. Consciousness matters, but something critical was missing. The teachings came from deeper spiritual contexts that assumed wholeness. It assumed a connection to the body. It assumed a connection to the land, the rhythm of the universe, your nervous system. When those ideas were lifted out of that wholeness and dropped into this industrial, dysregulated culture, it fractured. So the mind started to become elevated while the body was more and more bypassed, and emotion became interference. A partial truth became a total demand in the population. And what happened was when manifestation didn't work, it wasn't the conditions anymore. It wasn't missing regulation. It was you. On top of all of that, there was a wave of Protestant work ethic that followed. It crossed over the ocean, and it rooted hard in America, the land of uncertainty and brutality and survival. Morality made work stop just being practical, but it became proof that you were good, that you were worthy, that God loved you, that you deserved what you had. And this is not me bashing religion. It's a little bit of history here. So there were no guarantees in America. So work became faith, labor became identity, productivity became this virtue, and exhaustion became evidence that you were working hard and that you were this morally righteous person. And if you struggled, again, we weren't blaming the conditions anymore. It was your character. If you rested, you were lazy. If you wanted ease, it was suspect. If you slowed down, then you weren't strong enough. And this ethic spread not because it was kind, but because at the time it was efficient. It made people police themselves. It made guilt do the job of an overseer, and it made rest feel dangerous. So soon, not working hard enough didn't just mean failure, it meant you were bad. So this piece of self-abandonment justified as righteousness comes into the picture on top of everything else. And here's where Sigmund Freud enters the picture. This is when the question turned inward. Something subtle and permanent shifted. When Sigmund Freud introduced the unconscious, he revealed something destabilizing to the culture. Humans are not rational machines. They're driven by desire, by fear, by repression, by unmet need. And that insight, we should have taken that and changed the system, but instead, it just changed where we placed the problem. We didn't move from healing a system to healing people. We moved from asking what's wrong with the system to asking what's wrong with you as an individual. Suffering stopped being contextual. It became personal at this point. Anxiety became a disorder. Exhaustion became a motivational problem. Loss of meaning became a pathology. So instead of changing the condition, people learned to manage themselves even more, be better, be quieter, be more efficient. And self-abandonment became psychological. And the final piece of this puzzle, enter in Edward Bernays. This is where our desires became hijacked. When psychology left the clinic and moved into the marketplace. Edward Bernays was Freud's nephew, and he understood something really dangerous. He's called the father of marketing. He understood that people don't run out and buy things when they need them, but people will actually run out and buy things because they're trying to become someone. If you could link a product to identity, to belonging, to worth, desire would do the work for you. And this is where the deepest hijacking happened. Desire stopped being something you listened to, and it became something that you looked for. Instead of asking, what do I actually need? People started to ask, what will fix how I feel about myself? So marketing didn't sell products. It sold relief. It sold status. It sold happiness. It sold a better version of you. And it still does to some extent. So when something felt wrong inside, we began to look outward, to buy, to achieve, to upgrade. And the more you search outside yourself, the harder it became for us to understand what we actually wanted. What you've been convinced you want might not be what you want at all. It might just be what you told would finally make you, what you were told would finally make you feel like you were good enough. So self-abandonment didn't just become normal, it became profitable. So when people come to me and they say, I don't know what I want, I feel disconnected, I can't trust myself, that isn't failure. That's history living in your nervous system. I mean, talk about generational trauma, right? Because the most dangerous thing in a culture that's built on extraction is a person who stops abandoning themselves. It's not self-help. It's not deconditioning. It's remembering. And boundaries are a part of that remembering. That's how we fix the engineered self-abandonment, is we bring these back into our life and we learn to set boundaries and we learn to have our own energetic sovereignty and we learn to live by our own authenticity, regardless of the external. So they're a part of that remembering, because the moment you stop abandoning yourself, you stop being easy to use. You don't override your body on command. You don't confuse guilt with obligation. You don't mistake compliance for goodness. That's why boundaries had to be dismantled. They were reframed as selfish, as unkind, as disruptive, because a person with boundaries didn't keep producing when they were depleted. A person with boundaries doesn't keep buying to fill an internal ache. A person with boundaries doesn't stay quiet because it's comfortable. Boundaries interrupt extraction at the source. they return authority to you, to the person who was trained to give it away. And that's why this work isn't optional to me. It's not optional, and it was never meant to be easy, but it is like the only way forward if you really truly want to reclaim your own energy and your own freedom. Because we're all in the same boat, right? If we really want to shift forward as a culture, as a society, as human beings in a better, healthier, sustainable way, we have to start like we have to start reclaiming some of our own authority in the right way.